So thank you for joining us for the Symphony Learning Series, Menu Item Maintenance Part 2, Intermediate, fourth in the series. Today we'll be covering menu item classes and then adding a new class from a template and how to assign it. We'll go through the tabs, tab by tab in form view of menu item classes. We'll look at finding references to see which items are attached to a particular menu item class. And then, as I mentioned, adding a new class from a template, when we do it, where, at which levels we do it, and how to actually do it step by step. So first and foremost, when you're opening menu item classes, just as we discussed in the very first Symphony Learning Series, the hierarchy, the levels, overrides, you can open the menu item classes either from the property level, which is highly recommended and encouraged, or you could have overrides at the individual revenue center levels for menu item classes, just like most other modules. We recommend doing most of your menu item class programming at the property level, just to keep things straightforward for future database programmers. As you're looking through, it's a lot easier to see everything in one place. However, some properties, based on the way that the outlets work, you may, or your complexity of your menu, things of that nature, how many kitchens you have, you may wish to split up your menu item classes by revenue center. However, most of the time, the best practice is to do everything at the property level and then just have overrides where needed, if needed, at particular revenue centers. So when you click the module and you launch into menu item classes, you will see the table view with all the different menu item classes listed out, which is shown at the bottom here. It's really only useful, in my opinion, if you're trying to compare things, one sales itemizer versus another, or try to find something across all the menu item classes. 90% of the time, if you're in the menu item classes module, I recommend switching views, and there's two ways you can do that. You can double click on the row to the left, the row header, in order to switch views, or you can actually click the switch form / table view icon in the quick icons bar up at the top. Either one of these will take you to this view instead, where you can see a whole lot more information in the menu item classes than what you can see in those rows. Plus, there's so far to scroll on that other view. There's just a lot more organization here with the tabs. So in this view, the very first tab we see here is the General tab. And the General tab, you have quite a few options. And then on the Options tab, those are actually the on or off check boxes. We'll go through those. There's a lot more here than what we actually use. So I've kind of narrowed it down to just the top used items, and we'll cover these. The ones that I've kind of grayed out there on the right are very rarely used, if used at all, ever. So I didn't think it was worth going through today in detail. So we'll go through the items that I've kind of pulled out on the left here. The menu item class is the behavior of the item. And in this case, the example I used is food, full tax, no seat. So the full tax part actually pulls from this tax class here. So any menu items that are assigned to this menu item class will be taxed at the tax class that's set here on the menu item class. So this is where you actually link together the tax rates, the tax classes, and the menu items themselves, is through the menu item class. This tax class is set to 4 tax. This is going to vary by property based on the tax classes you have assigned. So we'll look at an example later on where you might want to change that tax if you have multiple tax rates or different types of tax rates. For example, if you have a sales tax versus a food and beverage add-on tax, this would be where you actually assign that. The next is the privilege group. The privilege group determines who is able to add this menu item to a check, bring this item in. Privilege group 0 means everyone can do it. There's no restriction. However, if you change that privilege group to 1, 2, or 3, then you would need to have a manager swipe with the access to privilege groups 1, 2, or 3 permission on their cards. By default, managers have access to all 3 privilege groups, 1, 2, or 3, but you could add just one particular group. For example, if you wanted to allow bartenders to ring this item, but not cocktail servers, you could give the bartenders the right to privilege group 3, for example, and then set this item to a privilege group 3, and then they wouldn't need to swipe, but others would. Next is the sales itemizer. The sales itemizer is what is sent over to Opera when you use a room charge. So in this case, it's set as food. The other itemizers that we have set are liquor, beer, wine, miscellaneous, delivery charge for room service, audiovisual, room rental. So those sales itemizers determine what is sent to Opera, how it posts over based on the mapping to the transaction codes in Opera. And they also determine eligibility for World of Hyatt. So if you have food marked as an eligible to earn or eligible to redeem item in the World of Hyatt configuration website for point of sale, then the sales itemizer here also determines that eligibility. Since it's a food item, it is eligible to earn points or can be paid for by points if you're redeeming in the outlets. Discount itemizer is similar, but the only thing that it's really used for is to determine eligibility for discounting. Most of our discounts are food-only discounts. So if you have this discount itemizer set to food and you apply a 50% employee discount, for example, that would work in this case. However, the employee discount is not eligible on liquor, beer, or wine. So if that discount itemizer was set to liquor, beer, or wine, it would not be discountable with that 50% discount. Service charge itemizer, very similar. Most of the time, we just have GRAT or non-GRAT. In this case, 1 is GRAT, it's just not labeled on my test example. The next is HALO, H-A-L-O, which stands for High Amount Lockout. This is typically used only on open, like open food or open beverage items. And this is simply a maximum. If you wanted to have an open food item, but say that the maximum allowed is $20, then you can put 20 into the HALO and that will lock out any amount above $20. The last two are in regards to printing. Print group, in this case, print group 1, you can select a large number of print group numbers, and that determines the order in which things print on the kitchen printer or on the customer receipt, depending on if you have that option activated. So, for example, if you wanted to reorganize the kitchen printer to print all your appetizers and soups and salads first, and then print entrees, and then print desserts last, you could have that sort by print group automatically, and then set the print groups for those various classes here. Lastly is the print class. This is the default print class for this entire menu item class. So in this case, we have 300 guest check only, and that means any items that are assigned to this menu item class, food, full tax, no C, would by default print only on the guest check. Now I say default because in the actual menu item definition tab, in menu item maintenance, you have the print class override just to the right of the menu item class. And this is the default, but you can also override that very simply right on the definition by changing the print class there. Next, we'll look at the next tab, which is the options tab. There's a lot of options here. I'm not going to go through every single one. Most of them, most of the time, should be fairly straightforward based on the names. To look at the first couple ones here, if you check the box, meaning it's on, then it's an open priced menu item. If you uncheck the box where it's off, then it's a preset priced menu item. So that's pretty straightforward. On, it makes it a condiment menu item. Off makes it a regular menu item. So that would be a steak would be a regular menu item. Medium rare would be the condiment. Number 5 is pretty frequently used. Reference entry required, but it's not very straightforward just reading that name. So if there's anything you ever are unsure about in EMC, I always highly encourage people when training to right-click on things because that will give you the help text. So in this case, I actually put the example in here. If you right-click on reference entry required, it'll pop up the help text and tell you exactly what that means. Select to require a reference entry for menu items assigned to this class. The text that is entered by users outputs to order devices, checks, receipts, and journals. So the reference entry required checkbox means that if this was, for example, an open food item and you rang the item in, it would prompt you to enter a reference entry. So you would type in whatever that open food item is that you've added. So if you have the checkbox checked for number 5, it'll prompt for that reference. Any of the rest of these, I'm not going to go through in too much detail that you have questions about. You can right-click on them to see in more detail what that actually entails. I will cover number 6, validation required, because it's not very straightforward either. Validation is simply a little chit that'll print out on the local receipt printer. So let's say every time you ring in a wine and you wanted it to print a local chit so that you could use that for inventory control purposes, you could use that validation required option. The ones that are actually checked here are important, 7, 8, and 12, in the sense that you cannot apply a discount to an item if number 7 is not checked, if it's in this group. And you must have number 8 checked if items are allowed to be non-priced or open priced, such as our EAS items or open food, open beverage. Number 12 is to add to the automatic service charge itemizer. So this overrides the setting of the service charge itemizer set on the general tab on the last slide. So if you have an automatic 25% service charge in room service, for example, and you did not have this option bit checked, then that service charge would not apply for items in this menu item class. There's several other areas below, print name 1 and name 2 on checks, print name 2 on order output instead of name 1. You can activate these options and then use the other names, name 1, name 2, name 3, in the menu item maintenance module on the definition tab in order to use those names in other various ways. This is page 1. I'm going to go to page 2 here because there are so many options. You'll see further down the list, most of these items here we're going to not cover. They're used less and less the further down the list you go. But when you get down to like 66, 67, 68, you can see print name 3 or use name 3 instead of name 1 on order output or touch screens or on checks. So that just gives you further ability to split out additional naming options based on items in this class. And then lastly, at the bottom, there is a search box. So if you're looking for a particular option, you can type in there, and if that is checked, you can also search within the help pop-ups for whatever it is you're looking for. The next tab over is the condiment groups tab. There's 3 sections to condiment groups: required, allowed, and member condiment groups. We're not going to go into too much depth here because we're actually going to focus solely on this tab and creating forced modifiers in our next and final menu item maintenance Symphony Learning Series module, the advanced course. For condiment groups, just suffice to know that currently most menu item classes will have all the allowed condiment groups checked, or at least the food preps condiment groups checked as allowed, meaning that you're allowed to add food preps or other modifiers to items in this class. The required condiment groups are typically the menu item classes that actually do require some sort of pop-up. So if you have a steak that needs meat temperature, you would have that required meat temp checked for the require meat temp menu item class. And that means it's requiring the meat temperature pop-up. And the various options, medium, medium rare, well done, rare, those would be the member condiment groups. But as I said, we'll cover all that in the next section in much more detail and go through and create examples. Next is the forced condiments tab. In this example, I chose the menu item class require build your own omelet choice. So in this one actually requires 2 different condiment groups, omelet toppings and toast choice. So in this case, we are setting the minimum and the maximum there to the number of choices that the user is able to select. So if they chose the omelet, the item that requires the omelet toppings and the toast choice that's in this menu item class, they're allowed a minimum of 0. They don't have to have any toppings, but the maximum of 14, up to 14 different omelet toppings if they wanted to have every option that was in this properties omelet toppings condiment group. Also, the toast choice has a minimum of 1, maximum of 1. Assuming that one of the options in there, the members, is no choice or no toast, that's probably why the minimum is 1 instead of 0. Moving on, fixed price meals. This is really part of the coursing system that we don't typically use in most of our properties, just because it is a bit cumbersome, and we do prefer to just simply add a course line or a fire menu item in order to communicate that with the kitchen. So we don't typically use this fixed price meals, but you could define up to 32 different course masks based on fixed price on the actual menu item classes if you built them this way. And lastly is the references tab. The references tab is really useful. You'll only find it here in form view, not in table view. And what it does is it allows you, if you click the little find references link at the bottom, it allows you to see all the menu items that are actually assigned to this menu item class. So in this case, food, full tax, no seat. If we click find references, you'll get a pop-up saying, do you want to show all menu item definitions that use this menu item class? When you click yes, the list will populate with all the different menu item definitions using this menu item class. So you can see the barbecue wings, baked goat cheese, fried pickles, etc. These are all members of this food, full tax, no seat menu item class. That way, without having to go jump back and forth between menu item maintenance and menu item classes, you can quickly see which items you're affecting if you do make changes on the general tab or the options tab, etc. So briefly, I'd like to cover adding a new class from a template, what that looks like, when to do it. Really, when you need to add a new class is if you have a new menu item that has to act exactly the same way as an existing menu item, except just one or two options or configurations that are different. So some of those options we looked at, right? If you wanted name 2 to show up on the kitchen device and name 3 instead of name 2, or you wanted to change the tax class, we'll use that as an example in just a moment here. One thing that you do not need to use it for is the print class. Remember, you have that print class override because it's the most commonly overridden option right in the menu item definitions screen. And we'll look at that in just a minute in my example. Where you do this is important. If you are adding a new menu item class at the property level, then it will be inherited in all revenue centers. If you're adding it in a revenue center level, particularly just for one revenue center that has a different option, you could just override that menu item class, and you wouldn't have to reassign it to the items that are already assigned from that revenue center. Most of the time, we do like to keep it cleaner by keeping all menu item classes at the property level. So you could simply override or create a new menu item using a property level menu item class as a template, and then simply change which menu item class is assigned to the definition, which we'll look at, which is covered actually next in how. There's 3 steps to it, and we're going to look at these one by one. First is inserting the record using a template. So you'll select the template menu item class that you want to use. In this case, I'm using that food, full tax, no seat as my template. But in this case, I want to have a new menu item that is retail tax or sales tax as opposed to full tax. In this case, is F&B add-on tax. So when I click the little green plus icon up in the top bar, or I hit the insert key on my keyboard after selecting that template item, we'll get the insert record pop-up. I always like to select that after currently selected entry. So in this case, that'll add record 108 because that's the next available record after the current one. And then check that box that says use template. That'll copy all the settings over from the one that you have selected and then put in your new name. So in this case, instead of food full tax, no seat, I'm changing the name to food retail tax, no seat, and then clicking OK. Then I'm going to go to that general tab and just change that one option. Change it from the tax F&B add-on to sales tax in this case. That's what makes it retail tax. I'm changing the tax class on the new class I created from that template. And then lastly, once I've saved this, I go over to my menu item definition and update the class that's assigned to that definition to the new one that I just created. So I'm loading the menu item maintenance module. Incidentally, if I've already got that open, since I just created that new menu item class, I'm not going to find it in the list until I refresh this tab. So if you look up at the top there, I've highlighted that very first icon on the shortcut bar is the refresh button. So if you click on that, if you already have menu item maintenance open, that'll refresh and research the database and allow you to select your new menu item class you just created from the template. Then if you scroll over to that menu item class column, you can simply change that food full tax no seat menu item class from 102 to our new one 107 or 108 for food retail tax no seat. Setting that menu item class then updates that menu item definition to apply the new tax that we changed on this example. So to recap, we covered menu item classes. We looked tab by tab in the form view at the different options and what they are. And the last tab of find references being how you identify the menu items that are in this particular menu item class. And then we looked at an example of adding a new class from a template, when to do it, where to do it, and how to do it.